chosen a complex subject, so we'll go straight into it. Right, we'll start off with the book of Genesis, as I sent out a note. The book of generations is a book of Genesis. It's a book of beginnings. It's also the book of generations. One outline of the book is 10 generations. Now you know that genealogy is very important. So I'll just run through what those generations are. The generations of heaven and earth, the generations of Adam, generations of Noah, generations of his sons, and then after the flood, right, Shem, and then Terah. Terah was the father of Abraham, then Ishmael and Isaac, then Esau and Jacob, and then finally results in the nation of Israel. So you've got 10 generations that is mentioned, right? The generations of Joseph from 37 onwards, 39 onwards. So you notice that with God, the genealogy and the offspring is very, very important. Because, you know, after the fall, what did he say to Adam and Eve? From your seed will proceed one who will get back what you have lost. Speaking to Satan. So that's the first mention of the gospel in Genesis 3:15. So thereafter you've got to find how does the seed go through and from where the offspring is going to come, which is the son of the woman, right? Which is the son of man, Jesus Christ. But obviously, if you're choosing that you're going one route, everyone else that's there is going to be excluded. It's like when you fall in love, you choose one person, right? But maybe somebody else loved you, but you can't accept, you can't have polygamy, right? So when choosing one, there's exclusion of the other. So when we look at this whole thing about the subject matter, which is the Arab-Israeli conflict, that's basically what it boils down to. That with God's selection, even between brothers, you find that somebody's left in the dark because they're not chosen. But the question is, how do they respond to them not being chosen? So that's what we're looking at. Right? When you start from Genesis 3, you'll find that God walked with them in the garden. He ministered to them. But as time goes on, we find that people chose, like from the beginning, Enoch, right, Abraham, Noah, they walked with God. So it was a choice of people choosing to go after God. But you know, there was a second beginning. The first beginning was a creation. The second beginning was Noah and the flood. But thereafter, things also got wayward at Babel, Genesis 11. So God had to go out and choose. And he chose somebody living in Mesopotamia, Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham, who himself was an idolater. When God called Abraham, he was an idolater, worshipping the moon god Nana. He knew nothing about Yahweh. He knew nothing about the living God, about the one God. He lived in a developed civilization. He lived in a city kind of thing, but he was an idolater when God called him. So often, and I'm going to ask you right at the beginning, even those that are online, and we're inviting online, keep your mind very, very open, because so often we have certain ideas about biblical characters like Moses, Noah, David, the great men, Isaiah, people like that. So what we're going to be doing today is going to open your mind and challenge you a little bit that you see things in a different light. But hopefully it doesn't disturb your faith. Now we know Abraham. You can tell me lots of things about Abraham, right? Abraham was the father of faith. Abraham believed God, Genesis 15:6, and he was accounted unto him for righteousness. But there are other things that Abraham did, and that's what we're going to have a look at, because we're trying to find out how did this whole Israeli Arab thing come about. And root cause, cutting it right down, is Abraham. Abraham was responsible for that. Right? So we know that the first wife that he had lots of wives. First wife that he had was Sarah. Right? She was a member of the family actually. She was close to him. And he even mentioned that when he was twice, he was almost getting into trouble because Sarah was a very beautiful woman. And he mentions that to get himself out of trouble. But we know that God called him, God promised him a land, God promised him offspring, as many as the stars of the sky and the sand on the seashore. So he had this promise of God. But literally and physically, nothing was happening. Time was going on. He was in his 80s, right? And nothing happened. And so we find that Sarah, obviously she was barren at this stage. She was barren. And she takes a handmaiden, who was an Egyptian woman. Her name was Hagar. And which was custom in that day. You also got to understand the customs and practices that went on. And it was normal in that day that the servant of the wife could be a surrogate in place of the wife, so that he could have relations with her and an offspring could be born, because the main thing was the offspring who would be heir. So first they looked at Eliezer. That didn't work out. They adopted Eliezer, who was one of their servants. And then we find Sarah presents this option to Abraham. Listen, why don't you go into this Egyptian woman Hagar and have children by her on my behalf? She will still remain a slave girl, but the child will be actually as if it was Sarah's child. Right? And we know she falls pregnant. From the moment she falls pregnant, there's trouble in the camp, because she starts to look at her mistress differently. And the mistress picks up on this, right? And twice we have a situation. So we have the conception first. From the time of the conception, the relations between Sarah and her mistress and the person that was serving her, a slave, became a problem, right? And once she tried to get away, and the Lord intervened, he heard, and he said, go back, submit yourself to, right, your mistress. Submit yourself to the person you are serving. She came back, child was born. What was his name? Ishmael, right? God who sees. The God who sees, the God who hears. So he's born. Now can you imagine Abraham's joy after waiting so many years to have a son? He's got a son. He bonds with the son. He connects with his son, and God tells him later on, listen, this is not the promised son that I said. This is your own works. Between you and your wife Sarah, you all brought this about. I will take care of this boy. I will bless him. I will raise him up. But the son of promise that I made to you is not going to be this fellow here. It's going to be somebody else. So that news initially, I'm just running through, right, the narrative here. That news was very displeasing to Abraham. And this is what his words were. Oh, that Ishmael might live. He didn't want this boy to be cast away. He didn't want this boy to be second rate. But God said, listen, this is your son that I promised you will come supernaturally when you are 100 and your wife is in her 90s. That's where the seed is going to come from. Through Isaac. In Isaac will your seed be called. So, supernaturally God visits. The child is named Isaac. Is laughter, because everybody was amazed when God touched Sarah. And of course Abraham was already fertile, and they have a son. So the big boy who's 13 years older than Isaac starts to taunt and poke and make fun of the little boy. And Sarah recognizes what is going on. She summons Abraham and she says, Abraham, listen, I think we messed up here. We've got a situation, we've got a little problem. Right, he's 13 years old. What are we going to do? Cast him aside together with his mother. Abraham is displeased about that. While he's having his doubts about that, God says to him, listen, I'm going to intervene. I'm going to bless this boy. I'm going to multiply him. I will see that he's well. But you have got to listen to your wife and remove him from you. So they give her a picture, right, some provisions. They let her go together with her son, Ishmael. So they go out into the desert. And God says, this boy that will be born of you, he'll be a hunter. He goes on to tell us that he was a skilled marksman, that he will live in the desert, that he will be a donkey of a man, he'll be stubborn, he'll be violent, and he'll always be in trouble with his clan. Like he will be a person that is restless, because remember now he's been cast aside. He's been cast aside by his father, and he has to live off the spoils, not of the family. So straight away, you've got a dichotomy. I remember the first brothers, right, Cain and Abel, same thing happened. One murdered the other. So right in the beginning, the very ground is set for conflict between brothers. So here you've got Isaac, the son of promise, and here you've got Ishmael, the surrogate's child, and mixed, because his mother's Egyptian, his father's Abraham. So he's sent out, and God promises to bless him, that he will have princes coming from him, and he ends up having his offspring. So that's the first part of the story, Genesis 16, Genesis 21, Genesis 25. Right? Abraham pleading, oh, that Ishmael may live, Genesis 17:20 and 21:11, and God reassures him, even though he's unhappy, that his seed is not going to go through this Ishmael, but that God will bless Ishmael, that he will be a man of the desert, that he'll be wild, he'll be restless. So straight away you've got, with the choice of Isaac that God had brought, we find that Ishmael is the one that's left in the background. So he's obviously a very troubled person. He's unhappy about what has happened together with his mother. So we have to now follow the offspring of Ishmael, because the children of Ishmael is the source of the Arab nation. The children of Ishmael is the source of the Arab nations. That's where they come from. What is the lesson? You remember God said to Abraham, I will bless you. You will become a father of many nations. Abraham took this literally. So when Sarah passes away, right, remember he's got Hagar. When Sarah passes away in Genesis 25, he takes another wife. Many of us are not aware of this. He takes another wife. And that wife's name, she's also probably Egyptian. Right? And she used to be a concubine of Abraham. He now takes her as his wife, seeing that his wife has passed away and he's buried there in the cave Machpelah. And she bears him 6 children. Right? How many children altogether Abraham has got? 8. Right? 8. 7 of them Arab. 1 of them the promised seed, Jew. Can you see? So obviously you're going to have trouble. You've got the children of Keturah. And part of the children of Keturah, right, is Sheba and Midian. You come across Midian, right? Midian is well known for where Moses went. And Moses got his wife, Zipporah, from the Midianite, right? Now that comes from Abraham's offspring through Keturah, right? That's found for us in Genesis chapter 25. So what Abraham does, just give you an idea, Genesis 25:6, I want you to stay with the narrative, but I'll just show you this. Abraham took another wife whose name is Keturah. She bore him, and a whole list of all those things. And this is what happens. All these were the children of Keturah, verse number 4. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac. So what happens with his sons from Keturah? These are the days of Abraham's life, 175 years, right? What he does is, he sends them away, verse number 6, but the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts. How's that? All his possession goes to Isaac, but he gives gifts to these poor fellas. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. Can you see that? East of Israel will be Arabia. So, kind of trade-off. Send, give them gifts, go away. You don't have part of this legacy with my flocks and my blessings that will be here. So continuously you'll see the story of separation. Remember when God called Abraham, he didn't travel alone. His nephew came with him. Lot. He had a lot more stuff than he would have. And Lot, because he was a nephew, wasn't really direct in line for the promises. He starts to mess up. He's going to Sodom. He's living in close to the city. He gets captured. Abraham has to go and recapture him and bring him back. But when he comes back, he doesn't learn his lesson like many young people back in Sodom. And as a result of that, you've got a lot of problems that come up as well. So continuously you'll find there is separation. You remember when the flocks were being blessed and the land was too big to contain them? And Abraham says, you choose there, I'll choose the other side. So that we'll have enough space for our flocks. So there's continuous separation because there is choice and there is children of the covenant that are continuously happening. Right? So we have Abraham now, you've got Ishmael as a result of Agar. You've now got from Keturah, you've got 6 sons, and you've got all their tribes. It's mentioned for you in Genesis chapter 25. It goes on to summarize Abraham and the 175 years that he lived, being active in that way from 86 onwards, right up to 175, having a lot of. So he took God's promise to him of having many seeds, he took it literally. He's been very productive. He's got lots of sons. And that's where the Arabs come from. Right? So that brings us to what Abraham did. Now what happens later on? Abraham has a son, Isaac. Isaac, when his wife is giving birth, a little bit later on, there's trouble right in the womb. In the womb there's trouble. And we find that his wife, Isaac's wife, recognizes that there's trouble. And she says, what is going on here? Right? And the Lord speaks and says, listen, you've got 2 nations in your womb. And the normal cultural thing is for the older one to get the blessing and to get the inheritance. But here, the older one is going to serve the younger one. And so when the twins come out, right, Jacob comes out second. What is he doing? He's clutching onto the heel of his brother Esau. So straight away, you find that there's trouble, and God chooses again, and he chooses the younger above the older. He chooses Jacob, even though he was this grasping, grabbing man, but he wanted the covenant, he wanted the birthright, he wanted the blessings. Where does that leave Esau? Esau is a wild man. He's another wild, outdoor man. He likes his hunting. Right? This guy was an introvert, Jacob. But God chooses Jacob because God could see in the future what their character would be. And he chooses Jacob above Esau. Right? You know the stories that happened there. Right? One day he came back from hunting, he caught nothing. His brother Jacob is making a plate of stew there. He asks him for a plate of stew from that stew that he's making. And Jacob conniving all the time, using his wits. Right? Sell me your birthright. And these are the words, right, of Esau. What good is my birthright to me? And the Bible says in comment about that, he despised his birthright. The immediate satisfaction of having that meal was more important than his birthright. So he wasn't a spiritual man, Esau. He was a natural man, and his appetites and the satisfaction of his appetites was more important to him. And of course, you know, later, that was the mother's favorite. And when the father was getting old, time for the blessings came, he goes there and he impersonates his brother, takes the blessing, even changing his voice. And when the time comes, they realize what's going on, it's too late. So, double deal, double whammy, right? Jacob has now deceived his brother and taken the blessing. He has also bought the birthright, which leaves Jacob in a favored position and Esau as an outcast. So what do you think Esau does? Esau becomes very, very angry. And when he realizes that they send Jacob away to go and meet with the father's family, right, cousins, and live there, far away, he says, I will choose a Canaanite woman. So he chooses a Canaanite woman. He has 2 wives. He's not happy with those 2 wives. So he's practicing polygamy as well. He's following in the footsteps of his father, Abraham. Right? Then he goes to the clan of Ishmael and he gets one of the daughters of Ishmael and marries her. So he's got at least 3 or 4 wives. And his name is changed from Esau to Edom. And whenever you come across Edom, you come across the Edomite, you're talking about the offspring of Jacob. So Jacob and Esau become separated. Later on, after he goes and gets his wives, Jacob, and he's on the way back and God wrestles with him at the river Jacob, river, and he's hurt, he's wounded, right? God breaks his one femur, and we find thereafter he has a reconciliation with his brother. They have a kind of love-hate kind of thing, Jacob tries to make up by giving him a whole lot of gifts. Esau says, I've got enough, I don't need that. So Esau ends up living in the mountain areas of Mount Seir, which later became where the Nabateans were. Seir became also known as Pelah, and from there we've got Petra as well. So you have the whole seed of Edom, which is now the offspring of Esau. Jacob, on the other hand, from him, the Bible records for us, comes 12 tribes. Can you see the multiplication? How come the Arabs are so voluminous? There's so many? Because they seem to be very fruitful. God blessed them, right, in that way. And the blessings of the land. So there we have with Esau, and you have what happens with him, right? Genesis 28, and the things that happens in their life. Genesis 28 verses 8 and 9. And so he adds insult to injury, mixing with the Canaanites, mixing with the Egyptians, mixing with the Ishmaelites as well, who are also called the Midianites. And that's what happened. Right? So much so, we find that they couldn't live together. The Bible tells you very clearly, these two brothers couldn't live together. And his descendants are found in Genesis chapter 36. The entire chapter is devoted to the descendants of Esau before we even go to Jacob and his family. So God puts that first. You also remember when we did the Toddler formula, the generation, right? He put Ishmael first, and then we have Isaac's generation. That's for the record, right? You can make of it what you want, but God is a sovereign God, and He is behind everything, and He does as He pleases, right? And we must understand His sovereignty and His providence in the things that happen. But you'll find these are the roots. Now, what about Lot? Lot, at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, is not even willing to leave. He has to be literally dragged out. And while he's leaving, they were told not to even look back at the destruction of Sodom. But his wife remembers all the nice fancy things she had to leave behind. She takes one long lasting look. She turns into a pillar of salt. She's solidified. She's calcified. And he has to leave her standing there. Right? Lord. So they end up in a little place called Zoe. Because they felt, listen, the destruction that is falling upon Sodom and Gomorrah, which is terrible destruction, won't happen there. So the two daughters had heard about the end of the world, at the end of time, from possibly Enoch and people like that. So they felt they were the last woman living alive, being alive to bring forth seed. So they make their father drunk in the cave, and each one of them has relations with, incestual relations with their father. And from there comes two tribes, Ammon and Moab. Right, so you add to the whole mix now with the children of Lot. That's the last you hear about Lot. Like he fathered and was a grandfather of those children. And that's how that ended. So you notice there's a whole lot of misdemeanors and misconceptions and things that happened. All of these now surrounded Israel. So taking from what and summarizing, you've got the Ishmaelites, right? And they were blessed. There were many there, about 11. Then you've got the descendants of Esau that we were talking about. We were talking then about Esau, Ishmael, and then we spoke about Lot. And we also spoke about children of Keturah, which was Abraham's wife in his latter years after Sarah had passed away. So all of these, what do you think was the feeling of the Arabs? Because they were always the one that was overlooked. Obviously there's going to be enmity. There's going to be hostility. There's going to be a feeling of wanting to hit back, wanting to get back what was lost, wanting to regain. But God, since Abraham was the father, blessed those nations materially. Right? I watched the Lawrence of Arabia. It's a classic 3-hour thing, and you see how, right, the Arab nations were, and how T. Lawrence, who's a British agent, goes and spends 2 to 3 years with him. He's written a book as well called The 7 Pillars of Wisdom, in which he recounts very, very copiously all his experiences, right, with the Arabs and how they overthrew the Ottoman Turks after or during the First World War, and how Saudi Arabia was able to be formulated thereafter. Okay, any questions on what we've covered? So I've summarized for you a whole lot, going through very quickly. I thought it would take me a long time, but I've gone through. So here you've got the roots, and the main actors here is Abraham, Lot, right, and their seeds, Ishmael, right, and Esau. That's where all the things come. Then of course, if you just want to close it well, in Genesis, when Jacob favored Joseph, the son from Rebekah, the other fellows didn't look at it nicely. Because they were being overlooked, and he was being primed to now take over as well, when he gave him that multicolored garment. So there's envy, there's jealousy, there's hatred, because the father looked well at Joseph. And what do? They can't speak pleasantly to them. And to add to it, he's a man of insight, he's a man of vision, he has his dreams where they're all bowing down in front of him, including his father and mother. And they said, this young fellow, he's mad. What's wrong with him? He's having these fancy dreams like this. Are we going to bow down to you? And of course, when they got an opportunity, when he came to give them supplies, when they were shepherding out there, they take him, they want to kill him. They throw him into a pit to waste away. But then the Ishmaelites go by, the Midianites go by. So they said, let's make a sale, let's make a profit on this thing. So they sell the guy. And through that, where does Joseph end up? In Egypt. Right? They go and sell him in Egypt. Of course, they made a cut there as well. That's typical now. From trading. They blessed in that trading and bartering and all that stuff. Joseph ends up in the house of Potiphar. There somebody looks at him the other way and he ends up in trouble. But from there he's thrown into prison again. Remember this guy from the pit to the prison. And then God has given him insight and he's able to interpret dreams. And Psalms 105 speaks about that, where he is lifted up when they couldn't interpret those dreams, and there is prophetic insight, and he's honored and raised up to become prime minister over Egypt, Joseph. And that's where he has to bring his father back together with all the families, about 75 of them come and settle. Right? Pharaoh gives them Goshen and they're living there. They're a pastoral people, and that's where Genesis ends. Genesis ends. So I've given you a summary of things. Any questions? Right? So you see where it all started. Right? Do you blame the others? No, you blame Abraham, you blame Lot. You blame these guys who messed around and mixed up. Esau, look at what he did. Right?
Yeah.
Look at what Ishmael did. So there's anger, there's sibling rivalry, there's loss, and then there's a promised seed. Right? But remember, if you're called and you are promised, it comes with responsibility. It doesn't come with a sense of pride and importance about who you are. No, it doesn't come with that. It comes with responsibility. And that's where when you look at Israel, and you look at what has happened to them, you look at their mistake, that's another story. So that's what we're coming to just now. How many time?
About 25 minutes.
Let's stop at that point. We'll just take any questions and then we'll start.